welcome to another Ag Talk with Doc show. I'm here in Las Vegas, Nevada at the Safari Club International's 50th anniversary celebration. We have a special guest here today with us, former Secretary of the Interior, Ryan Zinke. Ryan, welcome.
Great to be with you.
To Ag Talk with Doc show here. Just for my listeners, just a little bit of background on Secretary Zinke. He was born and raised in Montana.
Yeah, absolutely.
Went off to college in Oregon.
Yeah, played for the Ducks.
And that's an undersized center, I've been told.
Well, and I played with Daffy Duck on the side of my helmet. That's just before Phil Knight wrote the check, so I didn't have all the big O's and stuff, but it was a great experience to do.
Yeah. And then you joined the Navy.
Yeah.
And like a 20-plus year career in the military.
Yep.
A Navy SEALs, SEAL Team 6,
Yep.
and SEAL Team 1. What was the differences between those two teams?
Well,
or was that top secret?
Well, they're all, officially we say there's no SEAL Team 6 at all. But that group has a responsibility to the National Counterterrorism Team. We've seen the last wars, heavy concentration, heavy use of the SEALs across the board, and Special Forces. So my last tour I was a Special Forces commander in Iraq.
Okay.
And I can tell you, I was never the best jumper, diver, explosive expert in SEALs, but I always knew who was. So my art was, I surrounded myself with just unbelievable patriots, very aggressive, very competitive among the SEALs, but I had the opportunity to work alongside Special Forces and Rangers, and God bless them, because it's not an easy vocation. But they do it magnificent.
Yeah. So you finished your career in the military, you ran and became the congressman from Montana, and then you got a phone call from President Trump to be Secretary of the Interior. Take us on the inside of that. What was it like to be interviewed by President Trump, and what was his mantra, his goal? What did he want out of the Secretary of Interior when you were working with him?
Well, it was interesting. I'm the only secretary that brought my wife in for the interview, because my wife had been on the Trump campaign before. She was on the congressional spouse's bus and helping the president. And my wife had been to New York at Trump's office before. The interview was supposed to be about 30 minutes. It ended up being extended. He's very, very quick on the read. Saw a barrage of questions. And it's kind of funny, at the end of the interview, most of it was about national defense, most of it in my wheelhouse.
Right.
Very little of the conversation was about Interior. And I was getting that, he said, what about the VA? And I looked at him and said, sir, you don't hate me that much. because the VA is a behemoth, and
right.
A lot of work in the VA, and
yep.
it needs reform from ground zero. But Interior, we got an enormous amount done and accomplished in Interior. Energy component. We went from 8.3 million barrels a day and declining in just 2 years. We were the largest producer of oil and gas of energy.
Right.
And I'm not fossil fuel centric, I'm just American energy centric.
There you go.
Because as a SEAL, I spent most of my career fighting for other people's energy.
Right.
And quite frankly, I don't want your kids, your grandchildren to ever see what I've seen. And so it is better to produce in the United States. It's environmentally better to produce energy in this country under our regulation than watch it get produced overseas. And in ag, we're watching fertilizer prices go through the roof. And a lot of it because we don't have the capacity. We have the resources, but we don't have the capacity to produce in this country. And it is a national security issue not to have the fertilizers here, because we're being held hostage once again from foreign entities.
Right. So as in Kansas, we don't have the public lands that you do in Montana and across the nation. And as I become a congressman and senator, I found out, I don't know, is a third of our energy come from public lands? It's a significant amount. And then the same thing with the mining. Fertilizer prices back home have quadrupled from the nitrogen-based products. The phosphates, the potashes have doubled. And just talk a little bit more about what the Secretary of Interior could do to help drive down those prices a little bit. Just, the access to mining and just what are the challenges right now to get in that mining industry?
Well, first of all, on public lands, there's no greater stewards than those in agriculture, whether it's our ranchers or farmers. They understand the importance of stewardship of lands. I've never been an advocate for selling or transferring public land, but I'm an advocate for managing it. And public land is for the public's use and access, so we increased access for hunting, millions of acres, recreation, but public lands on the multiple use scheme, which Teddy Roosevelt and Pinchot put in place, and we benefit from it.
Right.
We also have to look at our national strategic outlook and things like oil, energy, and potash. We have enormous resources in this country, but the permitting process needs to be expedited. And look, there's some places to mine, there's some places not. But let's make the decision early.
And do it the right way.
Yep, and in the government, what often happens when we win an interior, a really short story. You have a trout and a salmon in the same stream.
Okay.
Upstream, you might have a Forest Service holding. Downstream, you might have dams. If you look at how we manage this in a federal government, the trout are managed by the Fish and Wildlife Service Interior.
Okay.
The salmon are managed by Department of Commerce. The dam system and water is managed by either Department of Interior through Reclamation or Army Corps of Engineers.
Or both.
Forest Service property, the subsurface is managed by the Forest Service through Department of Ag. Subsurface is BLM through Bureau of Land Management through Department of Interior. So you have multiple agencies with multiple tasks under multiple leaderships with multiple missions managing the same stream. And this is on the permitting process in the Trump administration. We looked at reorganizing it, making the permit system more joint. So someone that wants to develop or mine or use public land doesn't have to do a labyrinth and years and years and years for a permit and waste money. Let's make the decision either yes or no in a compacted area. So things like fertilizer as a national priority, and it should be. There's no more important thing than making sure there's food on the table across America and the shelves are full. What's driving the cost, as you know, is elevated natural gas, elevated energy costs, and we're going to have to look at the supply chain and make sure that America cannot be held hostage on fertilizer and those key components that drive our economy.
There you go. I want to turn and drill down a little bit more into Montana fish ranching and farming, and the connection with Kansas to me is cattle. You all raise a lot of cattle, and those cattle, those calves, young heifers and steers end up in Kansas at our feedlots and our packing plants. How does access to those federal lands impact grazing? I think that it just blows me away how much federal grazing there is as well.
Well, and it's interesting. A lot of the problem that I see is you have DC, and this is where the president and I disagreed.
Uh-oh.
He says, I said, well, this is the swamp. He said, Mr. President, I'm Secretary of Interior. America has a lot of beautiful swamps. We have swamps in Louisiana and Mississippi, the Carolinas. DC is not a swamp, it's a sewer.
It's a sewer.
But he said, no, I've already branded it. But
okay.
What part of the problem is in the case of use of land, of public land, when the decision emanates from DC. I mean, how does DC think they can manage the Yellowstone River when they don't know where it is? When their only context of Yellowstone is a very good Kevin Costner series.
There you go.
But living out there and using the lands correctly and make sure there is traditional use, that's so important. But when these decisions are to lessen the ability to graze and leases for traditional use on our food stuffs, you're exactly right. Montana raises a lot of feeder cattle. We send them down to Nebraska or Kansas, and that's a critical component of our food source. And so public lands is so incredibly important in this country, but we have to use them wisely, and we have to be stewards. To watch these catastrophic forest fires, or in some cases, down in the breadbasket, you have these grass fires. Some of them have been on public land, but a lot of it has been from not taking care of the land, not removing the dead and dying timber. These forest fires, when we don't do prescribed burns late in the season, rather than these catastrophic burns in mid-season, it affects everything. It destroys habitat, destroys watershed, etc., which is important, and a legacy, and public lands, again, belongs to us all, and we have to take care of it.
Great. Ryan, I'm going to ask you a personal question now. I'm going to go back to the summer of 2017.
Okay.
On June the 13th, I finished vote. Steve Scalise grabs me and says, "Hey, let's go visit Ryan. Let's go to his office." Incredible office. We got to see your pocket knife collection, and some of the trophy animals that you've had the pleasure. Steve and I had a great time visiting you. The next morning, Steve Scalise was shot, and you helped save his life. And some people don't really know this part of the story. Can you kind of tell me what was going through your mind that June 14th morning, and what you did to move into action to help Steve?
Well, it was actually a U.S. Park Police helicopter and it wasn't me per se, but it was an interior asset, as they monitored, and what they heard on the emergency bands was that there was an officer down. And so what they did is they diverted a helicopter, and when Steve was transferred, DC traffic was
Frozen.
terrible, and he was bleeding out. And had it not been for the diversion of that helicopter on the initiative of the pilots, and they transferred him from basically a freeway over to the hospital, otherwise he would have bled out. And it was just the actions of the U.S. Park Police, spontaneous, and God was looking out for Steve.
Oh my goodness.
And we're all glad to see his recovery. He was tough, but
I think
thank God for a U.S. Park Police helicopter and the initiative of the guys on the ground.
Yeah, he showed up at the hospital with a blood pressure of 0. I thought he was gone. If it hadn't been for Brad Winstrup's efforts to put some tourniquets on.
That's right.
A military guy, military experience all throughout the Park Service there, people knowing what to do and making the right decision.
Well, and Brad, here is just God's grace that Brad is a fine physician.
Exactly.
He understands in a military, and he understands trauma. Yep. And he was on it, but it was a tragic day, and it should give us pause. I think the biggest threat facing this country is not Russia, it's not China, it's not even Iran. It's the division in these countries. We can't hate our neighbor. And in Montana, if a barn is on fire, same thing in Kansas, you don't ask whether it's Republican or Democrat, you just go put it out.
Right.
And if the barn door is broke, you don't burn down the barn, you fix the door. So we have issues in this country that we need to fix. We have no border, we have high inflation, it's robbing everybody, and the hatred and the division in this country has become a distraction to getting things done. So we're going to have to address, let's not hate our neighbor, let's rally on the principles and character that has made this country great. Limited government, self-determination. The government should not tell you what to do or what to become, and protection of constitutional freedoms. And that's all the constitutional freedoms. And if you don't like the Constitution, there's a process, there's amendments, great amendments over the history of time. Women now can vote.
That's a good one.
Yeah, a good one. But it's our country, and we rise and fall as Americans together. If this country fails, and it could if the division continues, then America will end, at least the America that we love. And so I'm a little bit of a cheerleader, saying it's fixable. It is totally fixable, but it's up to American people to grab the bull by the horns and say, let's get rid of the hate, let's solve the problems, and we have to solve them as a nation.
There you go. Ryan, thank you for joining us. Thanks for coming to Ag Talk with Doc, and my folks back home, you'll see why he was a great congressman, he was a great Secretary of Interior, and we look forward to having you back in D.C. soon.
Well, it's good to fertilizer prices down, and let's make farming great again.
There we go. Thanks, everybody.